G'day, I'm Tav. Chances are, if you're watching this video, you already know who I am. If not, that's alright. All you need to know about me is that I'm a 3D furry artist. In this video, we're going to create a portrait of my character, so hopefully watching me create this render will give you a good idea on my ideas and thoughts behind why I do what I do. This is not going to be a tutorial on how to use Blender. If you need that, I would heavily recommend Blender Guru. He has a fantastic donut tutorial that he updates semi-frequently with each major Blender release. If you're looking at expanding your knowledge on artistic expression, there's a couple of videos that I would recommend. This one, the photorealism mindset, what about the physical camera, talks about the importance of context. He talks about why it's important to think about what might be happening. For instance, in our portrait, it's important to think about where this might exist and why this photo might have been taken. Another one is the secret to drawing overwhelming detail. This fella's also Australian, so there's a little bit of bias there. However, he talks about, in a 2D art capacity, how he draws detail. You might be wondering how that translates to 3D, but what I got from this video was the importance of conveying detail. It's not necessarily about having lots and lots and lots of detail, it's more about suggesting the idea that there is lots of detail. And last but not least, this video here by Curtis Holt, who I don't really watch any of his other content, but this particular video really stuck out to me. It's an advertisement for an add-on that he's created, so bear that in mind, but at about 26 minutes in, he starts to talk about the decisions that he made while making the add-on and why. And the explanations that he gives about physically based lighting were a game changer for me. He talks about a few other interesting things, but I would highly recommend, like with all of these videos, that you go watch it yourself. I like to run Blender a little bit differently from default. There's a couple of things that I use very often that I think are important to have on my home screen. You can set up Blender however you want, but I like to have the shader editor around because the most important part of lighting, in my opinion, is the material, and a second 3D viewport, this one to see what our rendered scene looks like. Speaking of the render engine, I use Cycles with the GPU compute because I have a graphics card and play games. So, let me now bring my character in. Alright, let me get rid of this cube real quick. So here is Tav. Let's start with posing and composition. So I'm going to be taking a portrait photo of my character. So let's start with the pose. If you have trouble with posing, I would heavily recommend looking at reference. If I Google portrait right now and look at some images, chances are I'm probably going to get some AI generated slop. Unfortunately, that's just the way that it is in 2025. However, actual images give us a fantastic representation of what makes a good portrait. If you like the look of an image that you see, open it up and study. What is it about this that you like? It might be hard to settle on something immediately. For me, the colors of this image really stick out, but I also love its framing. So I'm probably going to create something similar. There's a couple of things that we can infer from this pose, and I'm going to do a very scientific thing called take the image, slap it in paint, and draw over it. What sticks out the most to me is that this person's shoulders are at an angle, and so is their head. Instead of it being a simple T-pose where they're directly looking at the camera, you can see there's dynamics in it by having an angled shoulder and an angled neck. It's a very dynamic pose, and of course the hand as well. So we're going to incorporate those things in our render, and that's pretty much it. That's all I'm really going to be using from this image. In my opinion, one of the important parts of posing is about having your composition right. I try to minimize what I call dead space. It's essentially how much nothing is in your frame. This portrait, for instance, shows chest up with a little bit of empty space up here at the top, up above the head. The framing feels nice, it's comfortable, and you can see the important details. Whereas if I wanted to recreate this, and this is what I had going on, you can see that there's, A, it's off center, B, there's lots and lots of empty space that doesn't need to be there, and overall, it just doesn't feel right. Now that that's good, I can start with the pose. There's a lot of subtle and complicated things that happen to bones when we as people move. My best advice I can give to you if you struggle with posing is try to keep away from very, very harsh turns. This is a perfect example. If I want my character to turn left, this, to my eyes, looks a little bit strange. And the reason why is because we have a very harsh turn here. When you turn your head in real life, your neck twists as well. But in this pose, we haven't moved it. So I'm going to try again by taking the neck bone, moving that, and then taking the neck bone and moving that too. We can also add a little bit more subtle movement here if we want to convey a different feel. But ideally, lots and lots and lots of bones move all the time, experiment, and use reference. Speaking of reference, let's go ahead and look back at what we've had and start replicating that pose. This is silly. It looks like I'm mewing. It's not what I wanted. So I'm gonna try and fix that. I have forgotten something very important about this pose, and that's that these shoulders. There we go. Very subtle change, but it makes such a huge difference to the image. So there we go. I haven't spent very much time on this, but thanks to reference, I've created, although a different pose, something that looks quite organic. But how do we take something like this and make it pop? A quick tangent about materials. Everything in life is reflective. The reason why I mentioned that is because the way that it's done in Blender, in the principle of BSDF, is in specular. Specular lighting is essentially your reflections, your environment, environmental lighting, blah, 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 blah. Without specular, stuff looks like shit. And if your materials are strange or you're having trouble getting it to look the way that you want, there's a high chance you have specular off. 0.5 is the default, and only in very, very rare cases would I suggest changing that to anything else. So how do we make this look good? By default, Blender comes with this point light, yippee, looks like garbage, and then the environment, which is basically spraying a grey light literally everywhere in our scene. I'm turning all of that off. Literally all of it is going. And if it would let me, I'm deleting the point light too. If you're not familiar, there's a concept called 3-point lighting, which is essentially the crux of literally everything that I do. This is an alright image, but essentially it's describing one key light, fill light, and a backlight. I'm going to add a cube, and I'm going to give it an emissive material. Yippee, we have a glowing cube. I'm going to make it really small, really tall, and it's going to be our lighting cube. Let me make that much brighter. 25. Yippee. So, back to this image. First off, on the key light. The key light's job is designed to create shadow and light up the important parts of our character. You can see that what this light is doing is it has lit up a lot of the important areas of my character, but there is also some harsh shadow. You can't see the two ears on the far side. You also have harsh shadow behind the nose, along with around the neck and some other parts behind where things are done. The fill light is generally a much softer light off in the distance. The shadows, although still there and visible to help create shape, are a lot softer now. And now for the rim light. The rim light is what helps to create silhouette. And putting these behind our character to light up essentially the edges creates a fantastic rim around our character that really helps to create our silhouette. What a difference this makes. We started with something that looks nothing like this, and we have already finished with something that looks much, much better. In my opinion, it is still a little bit hard to see this character's mouth, but of course this little shit it just has to be all white. I wonder who made him. I'm going to cheat and use ambient occlusion. This is a node that you can add to materials in the shader editor that simply applies ambient occlusion onto your textures. And straight away you can see that that's made a very big difference here in the silhouette of my mouth. So lighting really is that simple. That's all I've had to do to create something that looks like this. Of course, exactly how you do this is up to preference, and everyone's going to have a different idea, especially depending on the scene that you have and what it is that you're trying to convey. Now, let's talk environment. If I think about the context, this is a photo shoot, and almost every photo shoot that I see doesn't have very much going on. This one just has some cool colors, and I don't know exactly how they made that, but nevertheless, it looks interesting, and we can probably create the same, but I won't get too complicated this time. I think I'm going to set for a simple backdrop, like what's in the back of this image. Let's introduce some color to our scene. This is an important time to talk about some more Blender settings. All the way down here in color management, there's this thing called a view transform. Now, by default, looks like it's AGX, but for these very characters and whatnot that we're making, where color is very important, I would heavily recommend Chronos PBR neutral. Change the look to low contrast and voila. Although it's heavily changed the look of our scene, which is just how it goes with color management, you can immediately see that our background pops more, and so does the color on my character. That's why it's my preference to use Chronos PBR neutral. If you have something like a light that you don't want seen in your render, go ahead and in this menu, that's the one, in visibility, you can turn camera off. And suddenly, you won't see it in the camera, but it'll still do its job. Woohoo! I'm going to make a custom set of lights now, something a little bit more tailored towards the scene here. I like to use ring lights. This is something I learnt from Curtis's video. I'm going to go ahead and make one of those now. Essentially, all this is this is a ring-shaped object that I'm going to go ahead and material for here. It's pretty much just one color, but on the inside we have an emissive light. It's a pretty funny looking thing, but it does absolute wonders when it comes to rendering out characters. And look at that. While only adding one of these lights, we've already suddenly made a very interesting looking piece, which, although this is not what I'm going for, because of course in a portrait you want to see characters' details, and you cannot see those details in this render, it still shows the power of having a light like this. And voila! Using some rings, only 4 of them in this case, we've created a fantastic looking thing. Let's head to the Compositing tab. I'm going to change how this is set up a bit because I do not need half of the stuff here. All I want to see is my camera's view. I'm going to enable compositing in the camera view, and then I'm going to enable nodes. So if nodes are scary to you, don't worry. It's pretty simple. On the left, you have your input, i.e. what we're seeing, and on the right, you have your output. Everything that you put in the middle, it changes how things are. For instance, if I invert the color, whoa, we've got an absolutely disgusting looking render. Surprise. Funny how that works, hey? We're going to recreate some camera FX. First and foremost, let's add some distortion. Looks very silly, right? The reason why I like to do this, we want to sort of take away from the uncanny side of the fact that we've done a 3D render. Not quite as noticeable in this scene, however, if we had something with an environment, for instance, you would notice, and it would make a very big difference. The next thing I think is important is bloom. It's called the glare node and has recently received a makeover, yippee. By default, looks pretty garbage. We're going to go ahead and change it to bloom. So this is what our bloom or glare node is currently adding onto our scene. It's taking some of the hottest spots of the image and basically blurring them and then overlaying them back over. And if we plug this back in and look at the difference, you can instantly see that it softens up certain areas and makes lights look more like lights. Not much more goes into it from here. Sometimes I like to increase the exposure and also increase the gamma. Generally tends to help add a bit of contrast. Not applicable in every single scene and render, but even just in this example here, it's gone ahead and just made our lights a little bit brighter and our shadows just a little bit darker. I'm going to open up the texture paint menu so that I get this here. You're welcome to copy these settings if you want. This is how I generate a vignette in Blender. It's a fully black color on the left that has alpha set to 1, and then on the right, it is, again, fully black, but with alpha set to 0. Back in our compositor now, we can now add a texture, now that we've created one. Now, normally I name it, and I think I will. I'm going to call it the vignette. Now, of course, slapping it in between here has caused a problem. Although we can see our vignette, yippee, this is not what we wanted. It is a great way to show, though, that by default, it's probably not going to be the right size. And I like 0.7 on all of these as a good way to actually make it look like it has the vignette. How do we combine that with our image? It's pretty simple, just use a mix node. All that's happening here is we're taking 2 inputs, we're mushing them together, and we're spitting it back out. We're going to change the method, we're going to set it to multiply, and we're actually going to use the value in our factor, which means that what's going to happen now is that wherever that vignette normally is going to set to this color. Yippee! I'm going to go ahead and put that on there. I might tint it some kind of color if I like the look of any of these. And because I'm lazy, I like to do 2 of these. There is something else that I think this needs. Aside from the fact that it's now a little bit dark, which I'll muck around with a little bit later in the compositor, depth of field. All cameras have depth of field, just some have much larger f-stops than others. I like to control depth of field by adding an empty arrow, yeah, sure one. and I like to use this as my pointer. So I'm going to select that and put that somewhere I want it to. Now, it's a very subtle change, but in my opinion, just helps to make things look a little bit more believable, convincing, immersive, whatever words you want to use. Now, this late into the pipeline, I'm going to go ahead and change everything because there's something I just don't like about how this is looking, and it just looks kind of boring. And last but not least, because I can, I'm going to do some in-house graphics because why not? Make it look interesting. Would you look at that? I added racing stripes and suddenly this looks more interesting. I took that idea from the reference that we used earlier. I closed the tab so all I have is the silly paint drawing I did. Adding just a little bit of something into the environment for this has made a very big difference, and we've suddenly created a very interesting piece. All I did to make this was make it a little bit emissive, and, well, I made rectangles. It's that simple. And I think as a last very subtle change, I'm going to use the fake lighting technique I was showing earlier to light up the sides of the face just a little bit more. So there we go. If I let this viewport render out, using the 3-point lighting, depth of field, and some pretty simple compositing, we've created a very interesting image. I'm going to let this render out now, and we'll talk soon. Alrighty, so that's finished off rendering. There's some very subtle things that I'm going to do to change how this looks. I'm adding another vignette. Yes, it's true. Apparently, wasn't dark enough already. I know that sounds a little bit strange, potentially, but that change right there to me really helps my eyes to look at the center of the image, i.e. this little dingus's cute little face. And voila, that's everything that goes into a tab render. I hope it helps.